in the park. A long time ago, this happened. At the time, I used to go to Boromai Park near my house for exercise on weekdays. I usually went out around 9 a.m. and came back around 10:30 a.m., doing mostly cycling and walking for exercise. At that time, bicycles and inline skating were gradually gaining popularity, so there were some people cycling in the park, though most people preferred walking for exercise. I chose to go out at 9 a.m. because if I went earlier, there would be many people commuting to work, and I was worried about colliding with others while riding my bike. So I aimed for a time when there were fewer people. However, when you go out at the same time every day, you often run into the same people. Among them, there was an older man who had a unique way of riding his bicycle. His bike wasn't a popular MTB mountain bike or a racing bike, but rather a very old-fashioned gentleman's bicycle. He often rode with no hands. Sometimes he would clap his hands while riding or stretch out his arms like the main character in the movie Titanic. It seemed like he wanted people to watch him ride with no hands. But from behind, his cycling looked quite nerve-wracking and precarious. His bike seemed old, and sometimes the chain would make a clunking sound, as if it got stuck momentarily, making it seem very unstable from behind. So whenever he was nearby, I either overtook him or stayed far behind. One day, when I went out for exercise, I saw an ambulance parked on the large track where many cyclists ride. Curious about what had happened, I approached and saw that the man, who always rode his bike with no hands, was receiving emergency treatment, covered in blood. There were no signs of a collision with another person, and no one else seemed injured, so it appeared that he had fallen while riding with no hands again. There was a lot of blood on the ground, and his face was bloodied. After the paramedics treated him and took him away, I began my workout, reflecting on how important it is to always be cautious. Surely others, like me, had felt uneasy watching him ride, but he seemed completely unaware of the danger. This made me think about how many people, not only physically but also spiritually, appear to be in a precarious state of faith, yet they themselves have no sense of danger or anxiety. How many times do we see people around us facing sudden accidents because they were oblivious to the risks? If someone had told that man that what he was doing was dangerous, would he have stopped riding with no hands? I wondered about this, but then I quickly thought that such advice would have been futile. In my experience, older people rarely abandon their stubborn ways. The older we get, the more we tend to absolutize our own opinions and thoughts, rather than listening to others, which is why advice or warnings are often ignored. Thus, while it is easy to listen to what elderly people have to say, engaging in a meaningful conversation with them is difficult. Of course, even among younger people, there are many who, caught up in their own convictions, fail to listen to others. Christians, too, can easily fall into this problem. Even though God is absolute, many Christians overflow with self-confidence and fail to listen to others. That is why Christians must practice self-reflection regularly. We also need to practice listening to others. If we are stuck in our own thoughts, we end up ignoring or dismissing valuable advice from others, and eventually, we find ourselves in a crisis or facing an accident, only to regret afterward, wondering why we didn't act differently at the time. Occasionally, we need to see ourselves from another person's perspective. Moreover, as Christians, we must train ourselves to see ourselves objectively through God's perspective. Through this practice, we can avoid falling into arrogance or pride, discover the contradictions within ourselves, and work on filling our deficiencies. Therefore, rather than living a precarious life of faith filled with nervous self-assurance, I hope that we will become God's people who constantly reflect on ourselves with open ears and hearts.
구독, 좋아요, 알림 설정 해주세요. Subscribe, like, set notifications.